change is here, now what? My name is Julian. So, in this channel, we explore the question of what do you do now after you find out that we're experiencing the sixth mass extinction event, that we are experiencing runaway climate change that's irreversible, which means we can't fix it, and abrupt, that is suddenly, and climate change, I refer to it as climate chaos, but it's extreme weather happening all over the world at the same time. So that's really difficult information to learn and to take in. So after you learn all this stuff, a lot of people ask themselves the same question of now what? And I've talked earlier about breaking down that question to different areas or different categories of your life and being able to answer it that way, so you can really incorporate that question and the answer to that question in your everyday life. There's a great book that just came out by Darh Jamail called The End of Ice. I highly recommend it. He goes to different places in the world, like the Great Barrier Reef and the Glacier National Park and Delaney in Alaska, and he experiences firsthand what the shock, I think, of how fast climate change is happening. He interviews the leading scientists in their field and in those settings, and he basically explains it in a very easy to understand, everyday English way what is happening. So I highly recommend it. To give you an example, is that he talks about with the Glacier National Park, the scientist he was with saying that he says there isn't going to be any active glaciers in this park before 2030, that maybe even before then. So that's very shocking, and it's shocking to me, but at the same time what's more shocking is the implications. So why are we going to lose this? Is the planet going to get hotter, or is it a regional environmental issue that's causing them to accelerate in their melt rate? So basically my question is, if it is because the temperature is going to get hotter, then that's going to be a wider issue. So then, what does that mean for the ecosystems and then in that area and then beyond? But anyway, that's a long tangent about more of the science and the examples, but so, I recommend it to read it so you can understand it in different settings. But to me, one of the most important parts of this book is kind of like his conclusion, the essay that he finishes with. And he talks about how he learned from a native culture, a native elder, which I can't remember his name right now, that the idea that, for example, in Western culture, we learn that we have rights. We have rights. We have the right to do whatever the hell we want, right to, what is it, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which apparently only applies to white, rich men. But anyway, from this culture, from this Native American culture, it's about obligations. So as you get older, what are your obligations to your community? And that makes sense, because typically when you do get older, you have children, you have grandchildren, you have a role in your community, and I think that's very accurate just in the surface level of that. But if you want to extend it further, and I think this is where Darh goes, is what are your obligations to the planet? And what are your obligations in terms of what do you do with this information? So you know that the planet is dying. So how do you react to that? Do you care for the planet more? Do you acknowledge the death of this planet and your contribution to it? So That's a really deep question, and I think it's worth asking multiple times and trying to find a different answer for each time that you ask that question. So the question of what are your obligations now that you know this information, and I think that's what one of the other ways that we can answer this question of now what. Right? The knowledge, what's that quote? With great knowledge comes responsibility. So I think that's that question of now what do I do? Do I tell people about it? What changes do I do in my life to incorporate this knowledge? And I think, so then, I know that a lot of people, when they first find out about this stuff, they feel obligated to tell other people. I mean, it's very alarming and life-changing news, and you want to tell people about it, especially the ones that you care about. And a lot of the people who have done that experience negative reactions, and people get angry or they just think you're crazy. So, but I think they do that out of love and out of an obligation. And a lot of people then continue their efforts or start their efforts of more sustainable lifestyle. And I think that's also feeling from obligation of wanting to better the situation, even though we know that all of our efforts to have any kind of balance or sustainability are not really going to make any changes, any impact. We're past the point of any remedy or mitigation, just because we are in abrupt climate change and the sea level rise and the melting of all of the nuclear power plants and all that stuff. I mean, we're irreversible and abrupt. I mean, that just means, we can't fix it and we can't slow it down either. So I thought that was a really good way to consider that question of now what. And he actually answered, Darh Jamail actually, that's one of his last lines. I don't have the book with me, so I can't exactly quote it, but I can summarize where he says something like, taking this information in and knowing that we are in this moment in history and in time, how then shall we live, and what do we need to dedicate our life to? And basically, now what is, I think, what the answer is. And so, you can come at it from a philosophical point of view, from a spiritual point of view. And I think that when part of taking this information and part of acceptance of abrupt climate change and that we did it, our responsibility, part of that question, part of that process is answering that question, now what, on multiple levels. Because when you find out this information, you're not a passive listener. I mean, you have a reaction. You have an emotional response, whether it's anger, disbelief, panic. I mean, you by the time, in my opinion, when you learn this information, you are active in this knowledge, and it changes you. And so then asking the question of now what, it can be another way of phrasing, like, what is your reaction to this information? Because, you've already heard it. So now what? How does your body respond, your emotions, your ability to understand it on an intellectual level? And then on a more personal level and a relationship level. So what I'm saying is that it's good to ask yourself that question of now what many times and trying to come up with different answers, because then that will get to, you'll find a deeper place of answering that question. And for me, it keeps changing, and I think that's normal. So I think that when we all come to this conclusion and we ask each other, now what? I think that we're trying to find support and some kind of solidarity and just kind of a relationship with other people who come to this knowledge. We always ask, well, okay, I shouldn't generalize, but a lot of the interviews that I've seen and some of the other people's channels, they ask each other this question, well, now you know this information, now what? How do you deal with this? How do you live your life carrying this knowledge? Because it is difficult. because it's really hard to, to go through the stages of grief. It's really hard to not get sucked in and stay in depression and just that crippling or that sense of worry and panic. I mean, there's a lot of very negative emotions and negative times and space that happens after you learn this information. So that's one of the now what? Well, now what? You go into a deep depression, and then, I think then you come to some kind of acceptance. And I think, at least in my experience, I think that working through the depression, anger, and all that stuff, you do get to a place of acceptance, and then a place of I guess it's part of acceptance, of saying, yes, this is going to happen, and I don't have any hope that we're going to fix it. So that's my new reality, and how do I change my life to reflect that reality? And what I mean by that is an example that I keep using about retirement account. That's one way that we had something planned for the future, but now we know that future is not going to happen. So, that would be changing an action to the future. But this is a very personal question, that everyone can answer in different ways. So that's because I think a lot of the time we just want that conversation, and we want examples. We want examples of now what do we do? Because maybe having this conversation with somebody else would give you other ideas and other advice on how to process this information. So there's a lot of stuff out there about having a deeper spiritual connection with the planet, and so I'm trying to read about that. A lot of people comment that they've been helped by the work of Joanna Macy. I didn't know who she was, and I'm starting to look up her information, and I started reading this book called Active Hope. And because I want more, because I do think I don't want to consider myself a spiritual person, much less someone that believes in a particular religion. So when I hear the people talk about that after learning this information, they can deal with it easier by taking a spiritual route. So that's something that I wanted to try, because the way I've been dealing it is not healthy. I think I do go through acceptance, and that's good, but I still get stuck in all the negative things, and I do things that are not healthy, both physically and emotionally, and I just want to break away from some of those cycles, and I can talk about that in a different video, but I really want other tools, and so I was very hesitant to look her up, and Carolyn Baker also talks about spiritual connection and how they see our current situation, and I was very resistant to that. But I think that I'm now more open to that idea of having some kind of spiritual connection, but also of answering that question of now what, just taking a different perspective or a different path and see where it leads me. So I also recommend that. You don't have to read those books or think about that, but just having an open mind to that question of now what, in different aspects of your life. And also, it is great to listen to other people ask that question from each other. So I definitely recommend the book The End of Ice by Darh Jamail. He definitely provides a lot of answers to how he answers that question of now what. And I can put some more information on the links below. But just think about that question. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk later.